Hello. 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 Can everybody hear me in the back? Yeah? Cool. And hello, Internet. So my name is CJ. I am CJ on NiverDev Slack. My email is cj@knoll.computer. That is a real internet address. That's my website, and I'm on GitHub as W3CJ. So, who am I? My name is CJ. I'm a full stack developer, an educator, and a maker. I've worn many hats in my career, including instructor, software engineer, QA analyst, system administrator, and help desk consultant. Worked all through the stack. And formerly, I was a lead instructor, principal full stack developer at Galvanize. But now, I'm currently seeking my next adventure, so if you have any cool opportunities, come talk to me. And in the meantime, I stream myself on YouTube. I have a channel called Coding Garden with CJ. I stream several days a week, just live coding, building apps. I do Vue.js, React, backend stuff with Node and Mongo and Postgres and Express and all kinds of things. I just got back from New York City. I was there for about 3 months doing a temporary thing at Galvanize. Has anyone here heard of Coding Train on YouTube? Yeah. Cool. So I actually get to do a guest spot with him while I was there. It's amazing. And so that just happened a few weeks ago. So there's a video on his channel that I did with him. I am also, ironically, the co-organizer of the Denver Vue meetup. I co-organize it with Marlena Baker. And now let's find out who all of you are. So who here develops JavaScript on a daily basis? Raise your hand. Cool. I mean, we're at the Node.js meetup, cool. Let's do like a survey of front-end frameworks. So who does Vue.js on a daily basis? Oh, awesome, nice. What about Ember? Ember people? No, a little bit? Any Angular 1 people? Okay. Some legacy code or? No, not legacy, okay. Cool, what about Angular 2+, 4, 5, 6? Awesome. And are there actually React people here tonight? Cool, I hope I will do you proud. I'm gonna do my best. Let's do this. So what is React.js? We can see on their website, it is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Some people kind of question, like, why is it the front-end framework Showdown? A lot of people use React on the front end. Typically, it might be considered the V in MVC or the view layer. It uses the Flux pattern, doesn't exactly use MVC, but it really is a library for building like the UI in apps. It's declarative, component-based, learn once, write everywhere. We're gonna do it tonight. And I think like one theme of working with React.js is it's just JavaScript. And we're gonna see that tonight. So tonight I'm gonna be using a lot of ES6, 7, 8, ES Next features and like really taking advantage of the things built into JavaScript. Cool, so let's do it. I'm gonna do a very brave thing and use the latest branch of Create React App and like the alpha branch of React scripts. All of this code is on GitHub, w3cj/react-barkwire. Actually, just real quick, we're gonna get super meta. I'm gonna pull up the Twitch stream and share this. Inception! So there's that, and then also I have my fancy to-do list. If you ever watch Coding Garden, I'm famous for making really long, really good to-do lists. Oh, and hey, Alka, welcome to the stream. Cool. Okay, yes, let's do this. Let's create a React app. So, as I mentioned, I am going to be using the latest branch. Oh, and before I forget, let me start a stopwatch. Cool. So there's an issue on the Create React App repo right now that was opened back in January by Dan Abramov, talking about like what's next in the latest version of React scripts and Create React App. And so he talks about all the things that are going to be in there, including like Webpack 4, and he has a note. This is alpha, so you probably don't want to do this in production, but you can use it by running Create React App at next and telling it to use the latest version of scripts. So we will do that now. Oh, yeah. Gonna test the internet. So how y'all doing? Good? Yeah?
Doing good.
You having a good time? Cool.
It's almost Friday.
It's almost Friday. I didn't really plan what to do while this was happening. Twiddle my thumbs? I don't know. Cool. I can kind of do a breakdown of what we're going to do. So we're going to make the React app. I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time setting up eslint, just because I want to have good errors in my editor. We're going to clean things up. We're going to talk about components. We're going to be using React Router version 4, and then we'll get into actually like coding on the stories as well. Okay, so it's created, and when you use create React app, that creates a folder. Apparently, I just created it called app name, but I'm going to move that really quick. Let's call it Barkwire. We'll go into that folder and then just do yarn start. So this will start up a Webpack hot reloading auto refreshing server, and wait for this. You might not have seen this before. Yeah? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, this is the if you've ever done Create React app, they used to have a different layout, like a header on top. So this is the new one. Cool. So I have a React app going. Let's kind of check it out. So, well, I guess even before we do that, let's set up eslint. I will show you what got created here. So we get a folder, we have all of our configurations, we have our source directory with our components and the setup. But one thing I want to do is set up eslint, so that way my editor is helping me be a better developer. So here in the Barkwire folder, we're going to add eslint as a dependency. I am going to install eslint plugin React, so this is going to allow eslint to understand JSX, which I'll talk about in a second. I'm also going to be installing Babel eslint, so that way the linter and the transpiler can kind of like work in conjunction. So as a dev dependency, I'm installing eslint. There's a caveat, I'm installing this specific version because that's the one that is supported with this version of Create React app, so let's do that. And once that gets installed, I'll just use the CLI tool to generate an eslint config and kind of like answer some questions for it. Cool. So, and if you're not familiar, npx is a way of running a command with something that's potentially installed in your node modules or installed globally on your machine. So in the past, you might have had to do npm install -g. Now you can just run it directly from there. So let's answer some questions. I'm going to answer questions. I am using the latest ECMAScript features. I'm using ES module, so that's like import, export syntax. We're running in a browser. We're not using CommonJS, that's like require. We are using JSX. We are using React. I prefer a two-space tab. Single quotes, Unix. I do prefer semicolons as well, and JavaScript. Yes, I realize I just... Yeah, but the cool thing about eslint is if you're working on a team with me, all you have to do is type one command and all of these things will kick in. It'll add semicolons, it'll convert it to a two-space tab or whatever. Cool. So that's running and installing things. And now we need to update our eslint RC once it gets created. Let's give it a second. Actually, I'm so used to like interacting with the chat while this is happening. I'm gonna pull up Twitch real quick. I'll leave it off to the side. Semicolons, facepalm. Cool. I am downloading at 1.7 megabytes a second. It's crazy. Almost.
What's your favorite React plugin?
None. No. I mean, and also, like one thing I do like about Vue.js is like it generates with an eslint and stuff like that. And that's one thing about like the React ecosystem. There are a lot of different, I guess, there are other starter projects out there. Oh no! Did it break? Okay, I have an eslint file. I'm gonna assume it worked real quick. But yeah, so Create React App is like the official one supported by React, but other people have starter projects that include Redux and other plugins and like their preferred way of laying things out. So it is, there's a lot out there that's one of maybe the not so great things about working with React, but I am doing it the official way. I'm going to show you how I set this up. So this is the eslint file that got generated. I'm going to convert it to a two-space tab. There are a few things that I have to add in here. I need to tell it to extend plugin React recommended, so that way it understands JSX and gets rid of errors like React is imported but not defined and stuff like that. I'm also going to set the parser to be Babel eslint. That can just go right here. And this is a bug I ran into earlier. Like, there's a warning in the console, and it's a bug specifically with the accessibility plugin. So I'm just going to disable this rule. It has something to do with text not being in headers, but regardless, I just don't like seeing warnings in the console, so I'm going to disable that one. Okay, if everything went right, we're going to kill this and restart it. DevTools. Cool. All right, we didn't break anything. So let's what's next? Let's clean things up and take a tour of the app. So like I said, it generated this folder. There is the source directory. Index.js is our Webpack entry point. And we can see we're bringing in the React library, we're bringing in React DOM, we're bringing in some default styles. This is, because we're using Webpack, we're actually able to import styles like this. It's importing the main app component. It comes pre-configured with a service worker that does like offline caching. And then here is where it happens. We say React DOM.render, we tell it we want to use this app component, and we tell it where we want it to live on the root element. So if we look at app.js, this is our main React component. So if you've never seen JSX before, it's essentially HTML inside of your JavaScript. So up at the top, we bring in React, we bring in component. When you're creating class-based components in React, you extend from component to get some of the built-in functionality and lifecycle methods. Because of Webpack, you're also able to import like images and things like that, so that's where that spinning logo was coming from. But let's remove all of this. So we're gonna get rid of that. We're gonna change our render function just to be like a very simple H1 that just says, hello, Node.js Denver. Cool. And now my app should literally just say, hello, Node.js Denver. There we go, cool. So I basically took everything that I was rendering out before and removed it because we're gonna add our own stuff in there. I am gonna get rid of the built-in styles because we're just gonna be using a predefined style sheet. Get ready to throw things at me. I'm gonna delete this test file. And I'm also gonna delete this index.css, mainly because I'm gonna be using a predefined style sheet, the same one that Kyle used. And then in our index.js, also remove that import of index.css. Let's also get rid of this React logo. Things are nice and basic, just the things that I want. Cool. So we've set all those up. We have a basic render function. Now let's create like a basic app layout. So this is very similar to the one you saw Kyle create. You have your header with the title. There's a main area. That's where all the app is going to live. And then you have like a footer. So I'm going to take this and put it into my render function. Why is this complaining? Oh, okay, so we'll talk about why this is complaining in a second. And one thing I also need to do is bring in the styles. So I have the styles hosted on now, but the other thing I didn't show is the public folder. This is where your main HTML file lives. And if you look at index.html, it's got some basic setup, and then there's that div right there with ID root. So this is actually where your React app lives, like right on this element. But just in the head, I'm gonna add that link tag so we get some basic styles. So now let's see the error. Failed to compile, adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Did you want a JSX fragment? So this is one of the caveats of the render function in React is because it's JavaScript, you can only return one thing. So if you think about it, I'm basically trying to return like 3 things right now. So typically in the past, you would just like wrap this in a div and then it would be happy. And we get a basic app, cool. But in the latest version of React, there's this new thing called a React fragment. And actually, let me show what this renders. So if we actually look at the element inspector, we can see we have div ID root, then there's that parent div, and then everything else lives inside of that. But if I change this to a React fragment, Now, this is basically a way of saying, I want all of these elements to kind of be like at the root of this component. And now you'll notice when it renders, they're all direct children of the divs, so they're not there. And then we can get even weirder about it. I don't think my linter supports this, but you can actually just put empty tags like that, and it works the same way. This is known as like the React fragment. I'm gonna get rid of that just because of the errors there, but that's a thing. Okay, so we have our basic layout. Now let's break this down into components. So we talked about this is our main app component, but what I want to do is I want to pull this header into a component, I want to pull this footer into a component, and then bring those things in. So in my source directory, I'll create a new folder, call it components. And in here, I'll create a new file and call it header.js. I installed some snippets today. I think it's React functional component export. Cool. So I'm going to create what's known as a stateless functional component. It's not going to be a class component like this. It's literally just a render function. It's a function that returns JSX. So the header here, I just want it to return this. And I'm going to get even weirder with it and just use like the fact that arrow functions in ES 2015, if they only have one line, it automatically returns it. So we now have a really basic render function that just returns a header. And so now if we want to use this component inside of our main component, we can import it in. So we'll import header from, components and header. And now right in the place where this header was, we'll now use that component. Let's do it like that. Cool. And it should work exactly the same way, but now we've kind of like encapsulated the logic of the header into another component. One thing to note, your custom components in React actually need to begin with a capital letter. So when React is seeing your code in JSX, anytime it sees a lowercase, it actually interprets that as just like a regular DOM element. So your custom components actually need to have capital letters. So we'll do the same thing with footer. Let's create a new file in components called footer.js, React functional component export, cool. And we'll take this footer and throw it in that component. And now we'll import it in. So we have that. I'm gonna try this fancy thing that's in VS Code. If you type something that doesn't exist, boom, automatic import. Cool, right? So now our footer's there. So we've broken it up into components, and you'll see me do this as I build out the other things in the app. We'll have a component for the dogs page, a component for the list, a component for each individual thing in the list. So that's our basic layout. Now let's set up React Router. So right now we have this basic app, but what we want and what you've seen is like in this blank spot right here is where the different components will live. This is where we're going to list all the dogs. This is where we'll list each individual dog. So let's set up React Router for that. The React Router website is here. Really good documentation, like really good examples. It's good, but it's also a lot. So if you're a beginner, it's kind of hard to parse, but I will guide you there. First thing, let's install React Router DOM. And I guess the other thing about React Router, and you saw it on the homepage, it supports pretty much any environment that React runs in. So you have React Router for the web, React Router for React Native, anywhere else. And specifically, because we're using it on the web, we're using React Router DOM. Cool. So we have it. Now we need to use it. So if we go back to our index.js, which is where everything lives and everything is set up, we will import the browser router from React Router DOM. And there are a few different routers built into React Router DOM. The browser router is one that uses the HTML5 history API, so there's no like hash in the URL. It's just like clean URLs. There's also hash router, but typically what you see people do is import browser router as router. So you just alias it to the name router, but it is a browser router. And then you wrap your app in the router component. So here we'll have router, and inside of it, the app will live. And now, that doesn't do anything on our page, but our app is now available to use routing. This is the router itself is using like the context and provider API, which I may have time to show, I may not, but that's essentially what's happening. Because everything lives inside of this, it has access to router stuffs. Okay, and now let's create a component that will hold all of our routes. So in components, let's create a new file. I'm gonna call this routes.js, React functional component export. And for this, we're going to be using a component called switch that's from React Router DOM. So we're going to import switch from React Router DOM. And the way this works is like a switch you're used to in programming. So basically, this lives here. All of your routes will live inside of it, and it will decide which route to show based on what matches in the URL. So we have our switch, and I think one thing I'll do is just add like a not found route. So anytime someone types a URL that doesn't exist, it'll show like a not found page. So the way you do that is you bring in router. And, sorry, not router, route. And inside of our switch, we use the route component. So we have route. And then this accepts a few props. The first one would be path. So what should the path be when this route loads? And there's also component. And this is what component should I show when that path matches. So for the not found route, I'm just going to say star. So you can use regular expressions in here. This says if the URL is anything, let's show this component. And then I'm going to define a component called not found. Let's do that in here. Not found.js. And this will be very simple. Just let's do like an h2 not found. So we have the component. Now we'll import it over here. So this makes sense. So we'll import the not found component from not found. Cool. And now we need to take this routes component that we created and put it on our actual app component, because we haven't done that yet. So basically, we're going to take this component and put it right here inside of the main. So what I want to do is just say my routes go right there. And we should see not found. Cool. So we have basically when the app loads, it looks at the URL, which is currently /, and that matches against star, so it loads the not found component. Awesome. We have routing set up. Now, on to the actual coding of the thing. As a lonely dog, I want to see a list of all the dogs that are available so that I can see my dating options.
We wrote actual stories.
Yes, there are user stories associated with this. Cool. The first thing I'll do is create what we'll call a container, and this is going to contain all the logic for that dogs page. So in the source directory, I'm going to create a new folder and call it containers, and you'll see the difference between what we call like a pure function component or a stateless functional component versus a container component. So we'll create a new file in here. Let's call this the dogs page.js. React component, I think. Cool. So I have this class component called dogs page. Again, let's just do a very simple render function just to make sure that it's working. The dogs page. And now that I have this component, I want to set up a route that says when the URL is /, like the home page, it should show this component. So in our routes component, we will import in the dogs page. And then we need to add a new route. So the path I want here is just to be /, and the component will be dogs page. This should work. Dogs page, cool. But one thing I want to do is put the prop on here called exact, and that's mainly because these will match even if the beginning of the URL starts with /. So later on, I'll have other URLs that have /. So by putting exact here, the URL has to be exactly / to be able to load the dogs page. Cool. So dogs page is loaded. Where are we at? Let's set up state. So I talked about this is a container component. Container components have state. So we'll have some state here, and the state for the dogs page needs some dogs, and I'll say initially it's null because we're going to have to get those from an API. So when the app loads up, there are no dogs, and we can actually use that in the render function here. So the way you access things on your state inside of like any function in your component is this.state.whatever thing you want. So I'm actually going to destructure this. So I want to grab the dogs from this.state, and then we'll do a ternary. We'll say if dogs exists, meaning it's not null, we'll say this is the dog page. Otherwise, we'll show like a loading message. Okay, so initially, dogs are null, so we see the loading message. But we're going to have to add some code that will update dogs, so that way it will eventually show them. I think I had in here, I was going to do like a loading component. How am I doing on time? Not good on time, so let's keep going. So the next thing is we actually want to call the API. So in a component, to actually call the API, you want to do this in the component did mount. So there are various lifecycle methods in React. This one runs after the component's been added to the page, and now you're ready and able to modify state. So what I'll do is we'll create like a separate file where we can call the API. So I'll get back some result, and I want to await something like get dogs. And then we'll just log the result there. And this needs to be an async function, and I need a get dogs function. So what I'll do is in the source file folder, I'll create a new file and call it api.js. In here, I need to export a function called get dogs. And this will actually reach out to the API. So we're going to get back the response from awaiting fetch to some API URL. And then we're going to return that response parsed as JSON. And this needs to be an async function. We need our API URL. That's barkwire-api.now.sh/dogs. Cool. So we have this function in this file that will actually reach out to the API and get the dogs. Now we want to call this function in our component and put them on state. So in here, now we can actually import get dogs. So I'll import get dogs from the API file. And we should see some dogs. Cool. So when the component mounts, it makes the API request, and now it's logging those dogs out to the console. So now we actually want to show those inside of our component. So let's set state. So right now, dogs are null. But what we want to do is we want to take that array that we just got back and put it on state. So for this, you use SetState. And this is basically a way of telling React, hey, we just got something, we're trying to put it on state. We'll put it on state, that will rerun the render function, and then whatever changes based on what you needed will actually show up. And actually, let's destructure this. Let's grab the dogs, and then we'll just set dogs on state. So now it should say dogs page, because that data is actually existing under the hood on state. Cool. So let's actually show the stuffs. So in our render function, instead of just saying dogs page, we'll have like a UL. And we could create a dogs list component. Not going to do that just yet. But what I do want to do is actually like show something on the page for each dog. So now that I have dogs in my render function, we'll just map over it. So I'll say dogs.map. This will give me each dog. And I want to show a list item for every dog. Not that. So we'll have a list item, and inside of here, I'll just show dog.name. So inside of JSX, if you ever want to access like a variable, you just use curly braces, and we're accessing that dog variable from the map. And so now we should see the dog names. Cool. But I get an error. It's telling me each child in an array or iterator should have a unique key prop. So this has to do with the fact that React is using the virtual DOM. And because there are multiple elements here, we need to let React know how do we differentiate between these elements. So we have to give them a key, very similar to Vue.js. And by giving them a key, it can keep track of them and know when something changes or updates and how to update or change any given one. So that should get rid of that error. Awesome. Now, let's create a dog list component. So basically what I want to do is take this code here and put it in its own component called dog list. So in components, create a new file, call this doglist.js. This is going to be another functional component. And I'll basically just take this code right here, pull it into the dog list as my render function. But now, we actually need to get dogs into this component. And so this is known as props. And what we can do is, we'll destructure it. Essentially, this function gets a parameter called props, and you have access to props.dogs, but we destructure it to grab off dogs, so that way we can actually show it. So now to pass that data down, we need to bring in the dog list component here. And props are just specified like attributes on HTML. So I want to say dogs is equal to dogs. So now we're passing down dogs to that component. And can I import it? Cool. So everything breaks. Dogs.map is not a function. Oh, not dog list, dogs. There we go, cool. So it still works, but now we're passing it down to that component. I was gonna do prop type validation. I don't think I have time for that. Oh, I can copy and paste it. Let's do that. Cool. So similar to Vue.js, this is basically a way of validating what props you're passing down to the component. So this is saying that this list needs to have a prop called dogs. It's going to be an array, and each element in that array must have these properties. The thing is, prop types used to be built into React, but that's now deprecated. You need a separate library called prop types. And then once that installs, we should be able to import prop types from prop-types. Okay, cool. Now we actually want to show the dog info. Thank you, past CJ. We can just copy and paste this. So basically, right here inside of the list item is where we can show all of that info. So this will be very similar to what you saw Kyle do a little bit ago. But now that we have each individual dog in the map, we have its ID, we have its name, its URL, its caption, its description, and then you'll notice we're wrapping this in a link. So, and actually, let me do this. Let's put the link outside of the section. Whoa, 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 oh no. Things have gone horribly wrong. There we go, cool. So the idea is when we click on a dog, that will actually take us to the dogs page. But link comes from React Router DOM, so we'll need to import that as well. So import link from React Router DOM. And, hey, we got some dogs, cool. Thank you, thank you. That was a lot of setup, but we got there, a lot of components. And now we're on to the next story. I think I was going to deploy. I'm not going to deploy. Let's keep going. As a lonely dog, I want to be able to link to a specific dog. So we already set up that link, but because there's no route that exists, it should say not found, right? Because the URL changes to be dog/1. Okay, so one thing I'll also do is let's make this header actually link to the home page. So in our header component, let's add a link here. And we'll put Barkwire inside of it. We need to import link from React Router DOM. And we specify 2. So when you click this, go to the home page. Cool, so now if I click this, back to the home page, but now we need to implement the single dogs route. So first thing, let's create a dog page container. Yeah, we will have prop types. I think I can copy and paste them. And for now, let's just show an H1, should say dog page. Then we need to set up a route for this page. So in our routes, we'll add that, be very similar. And we need another route, and this will be /dogs/some ID. So this is a route param where we'll have access to whatever ID is in the URL. So now we should see dog page. Whichever one we click on, it just says dog page. Now we want to show that actual information. Cool. So let's set up state here. So the state for this component is dog. And initially it's null because there is no dog. And we can do a very similar thing in our render function. So let's grab the dog from state. This dot state. And we'll have another ternary. So if the dog exists, then show an H1, hi. And if it doesn't, we'll show an H1 that just says loading. Cool, so we should see loading because we haven't gotten it from the API yet. Cool. So now, very similar to how we did in the other component, we're going to call the API in our component did mount. So here we'll do component did mount. we'll need to grab the dog from awaiting something like get dog, and we need to pass in some ID. Not get dogs, get dog, we'll have to create it. And before we can do that, the way we get the ID from the URL here is using props. So because we're using React Router and because we wrapped our entire app in this provider, every component has access to the current params in the URL. So what we want to do is we want to grab the ID from this.props.match.params. And if we just log it out, we should now see the ID of every page that we click on. So we see 2, we see like 3. So whatever is here, which we specified as ID in our routes, we actually get access to there. Cool. And now we can actually send that ID off to the API to get that individual dog. So in our API, very similar function, but singular. It accepts an ID. It calls the API. And it just needs to do / that given ID. Cool. And now if we log out the dog, and we'll also need to make this an async function, we should see the dog on the page. So there is the dog with ID 3. Now we just need to set it on state. So we'll do this.setState. We'll pass in the dog that we just got back from the API, and now we should see hi. So now we actually want to show the information about the dog. So we'll pull that into a separate component. And one thing I'll do is add prop types. You'll notice it's yelling at me right now, like, hey, you're accessing this stuff from props. I don't know what that is. And I can just tell it that match is an object that has an object inside of it, and I'm expecting ID to be there, so that will go away. And then let's actually extract that dog component. So right here is where I was showing the dog. I want to move this into another component, so it's just like dog, and I can pass down the dog like this. So this was our listing page, but now once I bring it into another component, I can reuse it on the dog page. So we'll have this. We'll have our dog here. It's going to do this. We need to bring it in from props. And, bring in dog from props. I believe I have some prop types that I can copy, maybe? I'm not going to do it. Okay, so now that we have the dog component, we need to make sure we import it into dog list, so that still works. So we're going to import dog from components / wait, where am I? Cool, so the dog list, this should still work, but now that this is in a component, all we have to do is bring it into this, this component and it should just work. So on the dog page, we'll import the dog component, and right here, we want to show dog, and we'll say dog is equal to dog, and there it is, cool. So, all the dogs, each one you can click on, it loads that component, and those things load up. Awesome. That's our app. I think I went way over on time. I went a few minutes over on time, but I will mention all this stuff is in the GitHub repo, and I may do a stream soon where like I add this stuff onto it. So using the React Context API to basically extract all of our state up into a provider and all of our functions. It's very similar to Redux if you've ever worked with that, but it's now like built into React. Cool. Links and plugs, all the code is here, git.io/react-barkwire. If you didn't attend last year, last year I built an MVC like mini framework from scratch. So if you just search front-end face-off vanilla.js MVC, it's a really fun time, so check out that video. Subscribe on YouTube, Coding Garden with CJ. I go live multiple days a week. Lots of cool stuff there. And I am giving a talk with Marlena at Denver Startup Week on the 26th. We're doing a talk called Prototyping Overnight with Vue.js. So we're going to talk about all the Vue ecosystem, all of the cool plugins and things that are available to you to make really cool prototypes and usable prototypes and things that you can work on and make better, and like more than just prototypes in that talk. So check that out as well. Thank you very much.